Hello, and welcome to the ScrubPod Podcast. This is my show where me and my pod of scrubs get nice and clean all up in the tub of Magic the Gathering related content. We share our stories, we give our takes, and more importantly, I am alone today. Yes, this is an Andy solo episode. I am now screaming within the confines of my wall. This is going to be more of a captain's log than a real podcast. This is more a one of those audio entries that you pick up when you're playing a survival horror game. This is my final transmission, actually. I'm joking. This is not even close to my final transmission. I only want my final transition to actually be from the throes of space. That is how I intend to die, by being launched into space. I want to be floating around in the stars, and I want to see the stars whether my eyes are open or closed. But today is still a Magic the Gathering related day. Today I'm going to talk about something that's very important that a lot of people don't actually do, and that is take apart decks. Magic the Gathering is a game about creation, and a game about creation also entails that there is a game about destruction and deconstruction. And Magic is that. Magic is a physical game, so it takes up a lot of physical space. And that is an actual limitation when it comes to creating decks. Magic is a very expensive hobby. Printer ink is surprisingly expensive when you're someone that loves to build lots and lots of decks. And this is coming all from me, a perspective of someone that brews a lot of decks, someone that has a lot of cards, someone that loves to play a variety of styles. And so, from my perspective, I think everyone should be taking apart decks more often. That is hard to do, though, because you get nostalgic with your decks. You can form emotional attachments with your decks. So what I'm going to do with this episode is I'm going to run through some of my decks and, learned how to break up with them. That's the way we'll put it. It's Valentine's Day as I'm recording this. So that's the theme will be breaking up with your decks. So the first deck, I'm going to go run through my Mox field and just figure out when exactly I knew it was the right time to end things. I want to start off with the first, because no one forgets their first. And that is true. My first EDH deck that I built, I started playing Commander around 2017, 2018. I got into the game around 2015, built a really shitty deck that I only played once. I remember casting Fog and that being a highlight, but I want to talk about my first real Commander deck, the deck that I actually put a lot of money towards growing up, and that is Zur the Enchanter. He is my boy. Back then, when I first started playing Magic, to put it simply, I was a teenager, so therefore I was an asshole. I wanted to win. I found something that I was good at, and no one was going to take it away from me. And so I put a lot of time and energy into creating a deck that I wanted to be unstoppable. And one way that I did that was by playing essentially Pillow Fort. I played a Pillow Fort version of Zur the Enchanter, naturally, that just played a lot of counterspells and a lot of just enchantments that made it so hard to do anything to me. And I loved this deck so much. It hurt a lot of people, but I love it so much. I'm looking through the old deck list that hasn't been updated in many, many years. This would be considered... This was considered bracket 4 at the time. I'd consider it a 8 or a 9 on the old scale. And I'm just looking at it and getting nostalgic. This is... I remember it was a big deal because I would win with Labman. And I was so excited when Jace, Wielder of Mysteries came out. I'm like, oh my god, I got 2. I have 2 ways to win the game now. And this one's a lot harder. And then Thassa's Oracle came out. Less than a year after War of the Spark. I was like, wait, hold on, no. This is even better. This is a great way to win. Great way to play. But the deck was very much A plus Z. I'd cast Zur and attack with him, and he would just make it so that way I could find whatever the best enchantment was in that moment. There was Ghostly Prisoner Propaganda, so people can't attack. Rhystic Study, so I could just draw a bajillion cards. Phyrexian Arena, Smuggler's Share, Shielded by Faith, things to protect my creatures. Temporary Lockdown to lock down the door. On top of that, a lot of counterspells. You have literal, factual counterspell, Disallow, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Mana Drain, board wipes like Damn and Wrath of God, and Damnation. I was on 3 board wipes because that's what you did back in Commander. You would just wipe the board every chance you get, so that way you lived. The only way I would lose games is when I would get attacked. And I did not want that to happen. So I just made it so that way I can't die that way. I see I have a Narset Parter Avails, but I don't have any draw 7s. So that's good on me for not being a total dick. But I am on Thoracle, Demonic Consultation, and Tainted Pact. The OGs, they're very cool to me. Very sweet. They were novel to me at the time because they were just like, oh my god, these are new ways I can instantly win. This was before I want to call it the second large commander wave. Second or third large commander wave. Whatever the history is. This was around during COVID when everyone got into board games, Magic, bought some spare decks, and the idea of the power level system really came into focus. And more importantly, the things that made it not work about it. And this deck was just a hoser, because I wanted just ways to win. You want to know the styles to play with this game? I was on Helm of Obedience and Rest in Peace, which is a 2-card infinite combo that just mills out one player, and I would do that one at a time to win. And then I just also had all that glitters and just stuff to make Zur as big as possible. And just countered all their protection. So you could play a Voltron package nice and easy. Because when I was starting to play Zur, it was all very Steel of the God hand pilled. All a lot of just go all in and make Zur as big as possible and then control the board. And I was just like, I just want to go full control. And that's where my style play of being a control player / combo player kind of came into fruition. Now, why did I take apart Zur? And it was very simple. I took it apart for a very important reason, and that was this was my longest running deck. I had made the most tune-ups. It was the most finely tuned deck I had at the time within the resources that I had, and I was just stomping with it. People did not like it when I was playing it. People were, it was always like a target first. Zur had such a bad reputation by this point that, and rightfully so, I was always targeted. It was heartbreaking when I had to let him go. But, I'm happy now. I found someone new in Master of Keys as my Esper enchantments list. And that one is less hard control and more mid-range and more reactive and more graveyard based. It has a lot more areas to play rather than just every turn I'm going to tutor up the best thing possible. Then we're going to move on to another deck that I broke up with because I was a monster and I would play Slivers. Slivers were my second commander deck. Arguably one of my favorite commander decks. One deck that I still would play to this day. Every now and then, building a Sliver deck is calling to me like the Green Goblin. But there's a lot of different ways to play it. I had a deck that I broke up with where I was on mono green Slivers with elves. And it was a very fun deck. Very snowball-y. Like, how do you make Slivers better? Add elves. You either, in an elf deck, you go all in on elves. In a Sliver deck, you go all in on Slivers. And I was just like, why not go all in on both? But this deck right here that I built around 2018, 2019 is just straight Slivers. And you'll notice a theme with my commander decks was that I loved tutoring because this commander was Sliver Overlord. A great litmus test to see how a person is as a Magic player is what Sliver do they use as their commander. Because Sliver Overlord, that's a very, that means they're like going for a plan and they have a lot of different lines and they're looking for a little bit of a longer game rather than a quote unquote longer game. But they got a lot of different options, and it's a must-answer threat. They're going to go into the if this thing resolves and it's not dealt with in the next turn, the first thing they're going to get is Crystalline Sliver, and you'll never be able to deal with it ever again. You get your Crystalline Sliver, you get your Mana Weft Sliver, your Gemhide Sliver. I should explain. Sliver Overlord, for those who don't know, is a Wooburg, which means one of each color: white, blue, black, red, green. 7/7 Sliver Mutant. You can pay 3 generic to search your library for a Sliver, put it into your hand, and you can also pay 3 mana to just gain control of target Sliver. So, with Sliver Overlord, you have to play its little buddy, the parrot on his shoulder, a Muibid Changeling, which is 1 in the blue, 1/1 shapeshifter changeling, so it is technically a Sliver. But it says tap it, target creature gains all creature types until end of turn, and tap it, target creature loses all creature types until end of turn. So it works as a way to just steal your opponent's creatures forever. And in Magic, if you steal opponent's creature, you're not allowed to shuffle it into your deck afterwards, but that's not stopped me before. And then you'd play just all the great Sliver accoutrements, like Lava Belly Sliver to close out games, Harmonic Sliver to just blow up artifacts, enchantments, Quick Sliver for flash, Screeching Sliver for if you want to try and go in a mill style. But then there's all the other Wooburg Slivers. This was before Sliver Gravemother, which she is still unplayable. So I considered running her when I was rebuilding Slivers, but no, she's just not that playable. But there's Sliver Hivelord, which gives all your Slivers indestructible. This was when Wizards were cowards and made a 5/5 for 5 instead of a 7/7 for 5. Bit rude of them, if I'm being honest. They should have made Sliver Hivelord a 7/7. Then there's Sliver Legion, which says all Sliver creatures in control. All Sliver creatures get +1/+1 for each other Sliver in play. So it's a coat of arms specifically for Slivers. This applies to your opponent's Slivers too. That's because Slivers would just boost Slivers used to boost every Sliver on the board. And then they changed it to just Sliver creatures you control. And everyone, specifically me, is mad about that. There's a channel called MTG Goldfish, which used to play a lot of Commander on Magic Online. And they would do a Sliver game every year, where their entire goal was to just break Moto by just having one Sliver have every keyword and just cause the whole entire client to crash. It was a very beautiful game. It's very cool. But there's also Sliver Queen, which is a 7/7. The first Wooburg Sliver counts as a Sliver, and you can pay 2 generic mana to put a Sliver into play. This goes infinite with in one of 2 ways, especially in my old deck. There's Basal Sliver, which says all Slivers have sacrificed this creature, add 2 black to your mana pool, which is a Ashnod's Altar, but it just makes black mana. So you make a token with Sliver Queen, you sacrifice that token with Basal Sliver, use the mana to make another token, and you generated infinite enter the battlefield effects. So with Lava Belly Sliver, that just kills people. If you have Mana Weft Sliver or Gemhide Sliver and a Sliver that gives haste, like Heart Sliver or Cloud Shredder Sliver, then that's infinite mana right there, which then you use to cast your commander, cast a commander, tutor for another Sliver, tutor for Lava Belly to just win the game on the spot, Hollowhead to draw through your deck, Screeching Sliver to just mill out your entire opponents. World's your onion. World's your oyster. You could do whatever the hell you want once you just make infinite mana with Slivers that way. The other way was through Mana Echoes. Mana Echoes is a enchantment for 2 red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you add an amount of colorless mana to equal to any number of creatures you control that share a creature type with it. So you pay 2 mana, make a Sliver with Sliver Queen. That Sliver creates 2 mana when it enters off of Mana Echoes. Then that Sliver, you use that mana to create another that creates 3 colorless, and suddenly you have infinite colorless Slivers. Infinite colorless mana as well. Just do whatever you want. This deck was lean and mean, and like every Sliver deck, it snowballs. What that means is it really takes advantage. It kind of goes exponential, where 1 threat goes very well into 2, which goes very well into 4, which goes very well into 8. But this deck really does die very well to board wipes, as a lot of small creature decks tend to do so. There are ways to rebuild it because there's a lot of redundancy in Slivers, but it usually is very slow. And Zur had a big problem of being targeted first. Sliver Overlord was that a million times worse, because everyone is scared of Slivers. Rightfully so. It is a deck that if you do not do something about it, it will get out of hand. And I think a lot of the times Sliver pilots need to just constantly be aware that they're going to be the bad guy. Be unapologetic about it. Be the villain you are. Because that's just going to make everyone's lives a lot easier. It's going to lead to a better game if instead of you just, bitching that everyone's targeting me. It's because you are being a threat. You literally have the biggest gun at the table. Regardless of who the commander is, Sliver Overlord indicates a style of play that is going to be scary to everyone else. And it really is not their fault for that. I could see myself rebuilding it, though, and just being like, yep, I'm the bad guy. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm running an Armageddon in this list. Let's do this. I did run Armageddon, but I did end up breaking up with it because of the same reasons as Zur. It just got to a place where I was constantly being targeted. I wasn't able to play the games I wanted to play because no one else wanted to play the games it wanted to play. And, that's their prerogative. That's them. I'm perfectly fine with it. Next, we're getting into decks that I played fairly recently. And I say fairly recently, this is when I would actually upload my new decks onto Mox Fueled regularly. And I want to talk about my main woman, Alesha, who smiles at death. Alesha, who smiles at death, 2 red for a 3/2 human warrior with first strike. Whenever she attacks, you may pay Hybrid Orzhov. If you do, return target creature card with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Now, this deck was very important to me because this was a very pivotal point for me where I learned how to just level up my decks. She was there for me when I needed her, and I grew because of our relationship. Even though we don't talk anymore, I still think about picking up the phone. And this deck just had every powerful 2 powered or less creature with an enter the battlefield effect that just essentially said you're one step closer to winning the game. This is a very creature combo heavy deck that really relied on just generating infinite loops from the graveyard and just being able to eventually just make infinite copies of something or mill everyone out or deal infinite damage. Of course, you had the combo of Alesha and Master of Cruelties, which puts Master of Cruelties into play tapped and attacking, making someone's life total 1. Luminous Broodmoth in the version of Mothra, where it says whenever a creature you control without flying dies, you return it to the battlefield with a flying counter on it. So this deck sacrifices a lot of creatures, doing it through Alter Dementia, Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, and those just allow me to sacrifice creatures in order to put them into my graveyard so I can get them back value. This was the deck where I realized, wait, hold on. Blink is usually a color in blue and white, and I am playing it in Mardu. And this is when I learned, if you want to take a cool concept of a deck, take like an existing archetype, pick the 2 most popular colors associated with it. Remove one of those colors and pick 2 other colors and try and build that archetype of deck. Like everyone's played against a blue-black zombies deck. Now, imagine if you could build that deck by removing, say, easy way to do it is to remove the blue, and then you play green and red, and you play Jund zombies, or you can go the opposite way and play Jeskai zombies. We're trying to use 2 colors to replace the power of 1 color makes it so that way you have to play the deck completely differently in a lot of different archetypes. And this deck of just a blink deck that had to utilize the graveyard to kill over and over and over again. My favorite, in my top 5 favorite cards of all time is Alter Dementia, and that went infinite with the newly released at the time Kroxa and Kunoros, where Kroxa says, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile 5 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you have an Alter Dimension field, which is 2 mana. Sacrifice a creature, target player mills that many cards, equal to the creature's power. So you sacrifice your Kroxa and Kunoros to Alter Dementia, exile 5 cards, it returns itself, and you do this until you fill your graveyard with exactly what you need. And this deck, at the time, was theoretically a turn 1 kill. had several turn 1 lines. I've killed several people on turns 3 and 4. Killed several pods on turns 4 and 5. But that was usually due to the magic of Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus and Dockside Extortionist. R.I.P. Those cards were banned in Commander during a great turmoil, a great comeuppance, and it breaks my heart to talk about them, But, rightfully banned. Jeweled Lotus sucks. It sucks playing against Mana Crypt and Dockside Extortionist. It's just so much you can't do. It's either play a Dockside. What can you do? Sacrifice half your board or just let your opponents run away with the game. There was really nothing you could do against it, and so it was rightfully banned. I don't care what anyone else has to say about that, but the main combos I went on with this deck were Vizier of Many Remedies and Murderous Redcap, both tomb-powered creatures that I could play one at a time. If they died, I'd bring them back to the board. And Murderous Redcap, I could sacrifice it over and over again, and it would just deal 2 damage to each of my opponents over and over again, so it's infinite damage. I also played First Day of Class, which is an instant that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it and gains haste. So that with Murderous Redcap, which has persist, you put a -1/-1 counter on it, it cancels it out, and so you're able to return it infinitely. I was also on Kiki Jiki, Felidar Guardian, and its various supported accoutrements. And all of these decks were just amazing. I miss these days. Like the turn 3, the curve of turn 3 Imperial Recruiter, get Felidar Guardian, Flicker, Imperial Recruiter, get Kiki Jiki, and cast Kiki Jiki, win on turn 5. Those days are gone for me. This was a beautiful time of Mardu combo, creature combo, aggro, and the reason why I broke up with it was because I took it to the level I wanted it to take. Truthfully enough, I got to a part in my life where building the deck was as tuned as I wanted it to be. I felt like there was no steps I could take further to make it better. I could change out some cards, but I felt like it would change it in a way where I didn't like it to play. If I'd mess with one card, it would hurt, and I wouldn't like it. And so that's when I knew it was time to take it apart. Luckily, this was when I was very, very active on Moxfield. And so the deck list lives forever on in my Moxfield history. I could rebuild it. I gotta switch some cards around. I think it would still be pretty well with how it is, but it's definitely definitely gonna be different. And now we're gonna notice a theme of decks that I played because I was a sicko. And another deck that I had for many years was Feldegriff, the Happy Purple Hippo, which for those who don't know, the keywords, the text on it doesn't really matter. I was essentially playing a hippo deck. I was essentially playing a turbo fog deck. For those who don't know, fog is a instant from alpha and got reprinted a bajillion times that just says creatures don't deal combat damage this turn. And there's a lot of cards that have that ability, and I put all of them into one deck. And the reason why Feldegriff was commander was because I did not own an Angus Mackenzie. That all changed when I bought an Angus Mackenzie. Angus Mackenzie is a 2/2 for white, blue, green, and you can pay white, blue, and green and tap them to fog. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt that turn. So the deck was another hard control deck. No one could do anything. The games went on and on and on. My main win conditions in the deck would be just I'll cast Approach of the Second Sun, and rather than draw it, I'll just draw it naturally over 7 turns. Because that's how long this game went. No one could touch me really. I did eventually put in a lot more combos that sped things up. Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal to make infinite mana, and then I could just go through stuff. But I also was on One Ring, Psychosis Crawler, all these powerful draw engines. And the deck really became what I really wanted it to be with the reprinting of Arborea. Arborea is a world enchantment that says creatures can't attack a player unless that player casts a spell or put a non-token permanent onto the battlefield during their turn. So my goal with the deck would be to play out like a Leyline of Anticipation or a Vidalcan Orrery, some way to give myself flash, play enough lands to be able to just chill out, play like some control magic, control the board, counter the right spells, silence the right person's turn, fog every turn where someone attacks me, and then play Arborea, and then suddenly no one can attack me. And I can flash things in during people's end steps that'll allow me to win the game from there. And I remember playing this deck a lot when I was getting back into like the scene of just, instead of playing with like pods at college, going to like down to the game store and playing with a bunch of strangers. And this deck was scary to play with because people didn't really know how to deal with it. Frankly, it was just hard to deal with. It would just go off. It was a deck that kept drawing all the answers, and there was really nothing you could do with it. Should also say another win con with the deck, Mind Over Matter. Amazing card, underplayed. For 2 blue, which I know is a lot of blue, but it's commander. If you built your mana base right, you'll have that much mana. You can choose to discard a card to tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. So you could just, if you have the One Ring, you draw with One Ring, discard it to Mind Over Matter, untap it, and then suddenly you're drawing 2 cards. You can also do Queen, and that's going to force everyone to draw out their whole deck however you want. Temple Bell to draw everyone's whole deck. You're running the infinite combo of Wedding Ring and Consecrated Sphinx, which lets you draw all the cards you want at the price of someone else drawing half of the cards you want. It was a mean deck. I'm looking back at like these lists and I'm like, man, I really was an asshole. Why did anyone play with me? But then the sicko part of me is like, okay, now it's time to like play this deck again. I still have all the cards. I still got my Angus. I miss my Turbo Fog days, but you know, it was one of those things where you see a gross deck when you're younger, and it was a deck I always wanted to build, and then finally I built it, and I learned my lesson from it, and then I got it out of my system, you know? Call it that toxic X that was just almost like the overcorrection of just like, oh, you just got out of a relationship with someone really fast and loose and spontaneous, so you went out with someone very safe, very shut in, and you realized you wanted someone in the middle. That's just on you. It is what it is. It happens all the time. But another deck I have ended things with, and it probably won't come back just because of how mean it was at the time. The only deck I ever won on turn 1 with, and that is my King Ghidorah / Aluna Apex of Wishes sneak attack deck. Aluna Apex of Wishes says, whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card, put that card onto the battlefield or into your hand. So I would just stack the deck. Birthing pod effects, very powerful ETBs, huge creatures that let me put out even more big creatures, and then just went from there. I was cheating out creatures very easily. The highlights of the deck were card that's underrepresented, and I still stand by that, Anzrag's Rampage. Destroy all artifacts you don't control, then exile the top X cards of your library. X is the number of artifacts that are put into the graveyard from the battlefield this turn. You may put a creature card exiled this way onto the battlefield. It gains haste, return to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. That's just a good card. That's just sick. Putting Anzrag's Rampage into someone that's playing a lot of treasures or like a lot of just artifact dorks. The average person in the game of Commander will have around 2 artifacts, so you can put out a 6 mana creature with this, which 6 mana is something like Ancient Copper Dragon, or Ilharg the Razeboar, or Terror of the Peaks, or Urabrask the Hidden. This deck also had a Birthing Pile series of lines where I would just kind of go up a chain with whatever. This was a cool deck building challenge for me because I had to kind of figure out where my priorities lied in like the man base. So I'm like, all right, I'll have 1 9 drop, 2 8 drops, 3 7 drops, 4 6 drops, things like this to kind of keep a little nice spread of powerful creatures that allow me to get even more powerful creatures and then somehow get them back with like, I'll sacrifice something and get my Eternal Witness out back somehow. Or just win the game with all these huge creatures in play. The main way this deck won was through a combo I like to call Discord Kitten, where you play Displacer Kitten. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. And then you also played Atali Primal Conqueror, the Discord mod himself. 7/7 for 7 with Trample. Elder Dinosaur. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of the library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of them from them without paying their mana cost. So the way the combo works is you have Displacer Kitten out. You cast Atali. Atali flips, and as long as one person has a non-creature spell, like an instant or sorcery or an artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, you can displace your kitten will trigger, and you flicker Atali, and you do that again. And you could flicker Atali theoretically as many times as you keep hitting the chance that you're going to hit a creature. Some decks play on average around 33 creatures. Some play a lot more. Some play around 40. Some could go as low as 7 even. So the odds of you hitting a non-land card are very high. I think I've only hit all creatures once in the 2 years that I played this deck. The only time I was able to use this to take a turn 1 win was when my opponent, I was in seat 2, and my opponent on seat 1 was on Blue Braids Conjurer Adept, who says at the beginning, who's a 4-mana 2/2 human wizard. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may put an artifact, creature, or a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. Very powerful card. It's show and tell for every creature in your deck, for everyone, every turn. And my opponent played Island, Jeweled Lotus, cast out Braids, passed to me. And in my upkeep, my first permanent I put into play was Atali, off of the Braids trigger, and my first flip wasn't to Displacer Kitten, and just went from there, and just ended up playing every creature in my deck, including Craterhoof Behemoth, and Will of the Bellowers, Old Gnawbones, Urbrask, Terror of the Peaks. Everyone was dead, and 2 people didn't even get to draw a card, and that was the most powerful turn 1 I think I ever will have in a game of Magic the Gathering. That's the only reason I'll miss this deck. This deck was a fun thinker. It was fun to goldfish and just try and figure out the weird situations you could get yourself in. Reason I ended the things with this deck was just because it was time. I wanted new decks. I wanted to experiment. I had a lot of red and green other decks that I wanted to play that I needed the cards for. And eventually I took out around a third of the deck to put in other decks. I'm like, I'm just going to take out the rest of these, put them in the collection. I can always rebuild it later. And that is kind of my philosophy when it comes to a lot of taking part decks. I do it so often because I don't have any intention of really selling these cards unless I really need to. And so being able to get rid of them, but have the idea that they can stick around whenever I want, and I just need the energy to put them back together again. To talk about some newer decks that I took apart recently, the reasons why, I'm going to talk about my Stuart Big deck. Stuart, also known as Arthur Marigold Knight, for 5 mana, 2 blue, red, white, 4/5 Mouse Knight. Love every stat about that. As haste, and when it attacks, when it and at least one other creature attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a creature card among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, put the rest on the bottom of their library in random order, and then you return that creature at the end of combat to your hand. So this was my Flyers deck. I had 2 types of Flyers that I played. The first being dragons. This deck cheated out dragons, and I loved it because it was a knight that was just I loved thinking of this mouse that brought his army of dragons to a battle, and it was very hard to stop rolling once it got going, and it was very fun, very cool. But the other type of winged creature that this deck played, I played a lot of owls. I played like Sage Owl and Spire Owl and all these other like types of owl, because for those who don't know, owls in Magic the Gathering, when they enter the battlefield, they let you rearrange the top of your library in certain ways. So you're able to just like manipulate the top of your library so you're not drawing your dragons, they're staying on top of your library, so that way you have the time and ability to cheat them out. And on top of that, I'm running a lot of ways to manipulate the top of my library. I was on Brain Surge, which is a 3-mana brainstorm for 1 additional card, and had a slight blink package just because blinking out your creatures before they come back to your hand make them a new creature, therefore you don't lose them. But this is the first deck I built that I built with the intention of trying. Weirdly enough, it took me almost 10 years of playing Magic to learn this and figure this out about myself, but I wanted to build a deck for the first time where my intention was to make a land drop every turn. So I was on 38 lands, which I now know is the correct number of lands you should be on. That is the right answer. When they say put more lands in your deck, yes. I was able to just make a land drop and then just keep casting spells. And you know what? No one was able to stop me once I kept casting spells. Like, alright, you got rid of my Arthur so I can't cheat in my dragons. I'll just now hard cast my dragons. And it just got easier and easier and easier. And that was the most important lesson. It's like, you know when you're dating someone and they're like, and you learn like just the basic life lessons from them? You're like, hey, don't do that. I don't have any specific examples because I do not want to embarrass myself. But it was just one of those decks where I really just it was one of those decks where it never really did the same thing. It always got a different dragon out. And so I had to play a little differently, but eventually I would just end up getting all of the dragons out. And some people didn't like that because, listen, I got a thing for either controlling the board or cheating things out. That's the two ways I play Magic, And I'm not ashamed of that. Arthur, you will be missed. And finally, my most recent deck that I took apart. Let's talk about Is It Rocks? As some people may know from episode 5 of the show, all the way back in October, November, Derek and I went through and we played a bunch of decks with weird archetypes. And so a bunch of decks with archetypes of the wrong colors. So our blue-red Is It Landfall deck was Togo and Sakashima. Togo, whenever land enters, you make a rock. Sakashima is basically a copy of Togo. And so it was a landfall deck that was also an artifact cares deck. And this deck was very fun to play with for the very long time. It was my bracket 2/bracket 3 deck that just was very fun to play with. It did the thing. It made rocks, which everyone was a big fan of. And then once I got an engine out like Sky Swimmer Koi or Rook Turret or Transplant Theorist, any of these, whenever an artifact enters, draw a card. And I loved doing that so much. Just making all these rocks, equipping them, throwing them, drawing a bajillion cards. The only problem with this deck was that I would just do everything in my everything I would can. I would just do everything possible to just try and get Fomori Vault into play, because that was the most powerful card in the deck by a long shot. Because I had so many rocks, I was paying 3 mana to look at the top 15 cards in my library. And I was finding like answers, and it was getting a little bit redundant, but it was great against board whites. But, I stopped playing this deck, and I took it apart for the same reason I stopped playing Alesha, I liked where it was at. It was at that perfect level. I don't need to make any more changes to it. I am very happy and comfortable with where this deck is. I don't feel like I need to tinker with anything to be better or worse. It is good at what it does for what it is. And that is the best possible way to break up with a deck. Get what you want out of it, but just know that the journey came to like a natural ending. Another deck that I broke up with around the same time I built this was Abzan Spellslinger. It was an infect deck that sought to play cards that made it so that way my opponents would get poison counters and then proliferate using instants and sorceries, as well as like Monastery Mentor and Sedgemoor Witch to create little armies. That deck I took apart because it was just clunky. It was just all over the place. There's a reason why not a lot of people play Abzan Spellslingers. Sometimes the relationship's rocky from the start, and sometimes you like the bumps sometimes the bumps feel like it's getting a nice massage, but eventually it just becomes a little, too much. So you just stop, and I probably have no intention of going back to it, but hey, everything just exists on Moxfield now. So even if it's unlisted, it's still in my heart. But happy Valentine's Day, everybody. This has been an episode of the ScrubPod Podcast. I, of course, am Andy. Please like, comment, share, follow. Do everything you can to help the algorithm gods send me up into the clouds. Not in a religious sense, but in a more technological sense. I do not wish to be uploaded into the actual computer. That is when I am in my manic episodes. However, thank you for tuning in with me on what can only be described as an attempt at emotional catharsis through Magic the Gathering. And remember, only a few goblins were harmed in the making of this podcast.